Chapter 1. Dreams? The Philistine pointed his knife towards me and looked at the dagger lying near the edge of the table that was in front of him. He smiled at me mockingly. I looked at him, terrified, and he could see it. His smile got wider. "You won't make it, boy," he said confidently. "You're not fast enough," he said with certainty. I figured I only had a second, and I was nervous. I reached for the knife but wound up falling short of it as I wound up accidentally pushing it off the table instead of grasping it. It fell to the ground with a loud clang, as did the little courage I had. Then, taking advantage of my mistake, the Philistine laughed and then lunged towards me. "No!" I screamed. Then I woke up. I sat up in my bed, my heart panting, and my face sweating profusely. It had only been a dream, but it had felt so real. "Eliel be with me," I said in a whisper and with a sigh as I tried to calm myself. A dead man was trying to haunt my dreams again, it seemed. I took some comfort in the fact that the real fight with the Philistine had ended very differently several years ago. I had not only reached the dagger in time, but I had managed to gain the upper hand. Without question, I had been nervous. But many hours of practice had paid off. The Philistine was the one that died, and he was alive only in my nightmares. Perhaps this was the way the dead tried to remind us that they had once lived. The nightmares had lessened over the last few months, but while they diminished in frequency, they seemed to increase in intensity. I thought about what would have happened if I had not killed him, and it gave me some measure of comfort. I laid my head down and tried to go back to sleep, hoping I could rest for a few more hours, but not before making sure my dagger was close by. I got up early later that morning. I yawned and stretched as best as I could as I stood up from my bed. Yaron, my younger brother, was fast asleep, and somehow, he always managed to get up late. Tired or not, I had a lot of work to do. I had left one of our plows out in the north field at the edge of our farmland a day before. The field was near the path that led to the city of Garbahone. The plow's main beam had splintered one way or another, and I did not want to risk it breaking on the way back to my home. I had gathered strong rope the night before to make sure it would last on the way back. I wanted to leave early before everyone else was awake, even my father, who was generally up first. Whenever I had nightmares, I preferred to be alone at least for a while until the feelings I felt settled. I tied my sandals and then went to a basin to wash my face. I girded my belt tightly and slipped my dagger and its sheath through it. I laced the pouch that contained the stones for my sling. I counted them, making sure I had at least 5. I slipped my sling through my belt. The last thing that remained was my leather bag. It carried food, and whatever I might need for the day. These were the 3 things I never left my home without, but I could not find my bag. Where is my bag? I thought to myself. I left it near the bed, I said, irritated. I could not find it. Who moved it? I asked myself as I tried not to make too much noise. I figured it was Yaron but was not sure. With the little light available from an oil lamp nearby, I suddenly noticed my leather bag was on the main table instead of where I had left it near my bed. I walked to the table, and it seemed bulky. I opened it, and I could see it was full of figs and cakes. Dinar, I said to myself as I shook my head slightly. Dinar, no doubt, had filled my bag for me the night before, knowing that I would leave just before the sun was rising, but she had stuffed it with enough food for several people. Is she implying that I am fat? I briefly thought, or perhaps she was trying to fatten me up, I was not sure. With all the food, there was no room for the rope I needed for the plow. I slung it around my arm, and with it a skin of wine. The bag was heavier than normal, and it made me wonder how much work Dinar had gone to prepare it. Dinar and her sister Eliel lived with my family. Dinar was a few months older than I was. Eliel was younger and was now around 11 or so. They were from the tribe of Dan, but they had been captured by Philistines almost 3 years ago. My mind briefly wandered back to those days. I had met Dinah and Eliel on the way to Gath under very tragic circumstances. Now Gath was one of the Philistine cities along the coast. It was also called Jimti and Jintu by some, and it was south of Ekron, which was near the territory of Dan. Ekron had once been part of Dan, but the Philistines had put it under their control. It now stuck out like a finger in our eye. The Sea Peoples controlled 5 significant towns on the coast where the Great Sea begins. This is where the 5 lords of the Philistines ruled. The Philistines were our greatest enemies, but unlike the Edomites or the Ammonites who lay to the east of us, they were in no way related to us. Gath, where Dinah, Eliel, and I were destined to serve as slaves, was one of the last refuges of the Anakim, the great giants of old. During our time in Gath, I stood before one of the Philistine giants named Lami, the brother of a more famous giant named Goliath. Lami seemed to be twice the size of the average man, though I was never able to determine his exact size. Long before David, the sheepherder, fought Goliath, I met Lami once again in battle and lived to tell the tale of our clash. I touched my dagger regularly, to check it was there, perhaps as some type of nervous habit. It made my mother Heber uncomfortable. My mother did not mind me carrying a sling, but carrying the knife Achish the Philistine had given to me still bothered her at times. Well, he had not precisely given it to me. I had taken it, but that is another tale. I picked up the bag and placed it around my shoulder as I walked out the door. I closed it, and I walked slowly. Almost 3 years before, I had gone with my father to Mizpah when the tribes of Israel were called out to face the Philistines. Mitzaph, I said quietly, thinking it seemed so long ago. I shivered as a gentle cool breeze blew, but the sun would rise and heat the day quickly enough, so I decided against bringing a coat. I walked slowly toward the barn. Most people kept their animals on the first floor of their homes. Unlike most Israelites, my family had a building just for animals, as my mother's parents also had. I opened the barn door, and it creaked loudly. I entered slowly, leaving the door open to let in the light of the moon. I turned to the stall with an old donkey, who seemed to have opened one eye to see who was entering. "Good morning, sir," I said jokingly. The donkey looked at me with a blank stare. He either thought he was dreaming or was trying to ignore me. "I am sorry, Ole boy. We have work to do," as I took him out of the stall and hitched him to a cart just outside the barn. He grunted, but he seemed to do that whether he was happy or tired. We rarely had an interesting conversation. I placed my leather bag, as well as several tools in the cart. If the plough was irreparable, I planned to bring it back on the cart. I led the donkey in the cart, and we creaked out onto the path that led out from our farm. Our farm was situated to the west of Garbahone, and a path to the city lay close to our north field. Mizpah lay to the northwest of Garbahone. I thought of Mizpah often since it had changed my life. I had been captured there, and my life transformed from a boy to a warrior. I thought of how different my life would have been if I had stayed home or been at another corner of the battlefield. Now Mizpah was famous for many reasons. That clash is just one. Mizpah had been the site where it was said that our forefather Yaakov had made peace with his father-in-law Lavan the Aramean. Some stones were said to have marked the pact between them, though most men say they are long gone now. Mizpah was also the place where Saul, the son of Kish, was chosen as king. I was supposed to have been safely away from the battle, but I was close enough to be able to see the action, which is exactly what any boy would have wanted. My mother, Heber, had not wanted me to go. My father, however, had explained that I had to grow familiar with an all-too-common struggle for our tribe, that is raids, and skirmishes from the various peoples all around us. It was also expected, if not demanded of him, because of his rank. I was relatively far away from the main skirmish line when some Philistines had broken off and circumvented the area where the fight was unfolding. They surprised the mostly older men who were around me. I tried to fight off some of these slave traders but was hit on the head and knocked unconscious, but not before striking one of the Philistines with a stone from my sling. In the end, the ragtag army formed out of some of the tribes of Israel had won the battle, but I had been captured and sold as a slave. As the Philistines retreated from Mizpah, they raised havoc on the way back to Gath. They passed through the territory of the tribe of Dan and sacked the village where Adinah and Elet and their family lived. The Philistines, or the Sea Peoples, as they were also known, killed their parents and took the sisters to sell them as slaves. I met them along the way from Mizpah. The three of us were sold to a Philistine merchant named Achish, who we later discovered had epilepsy. He had treated us relatively well, and for some reason, took a liking to me. The three of us eventually escaped after Achish had been attacked by another Philistine. During the attack on Achish, I fought one of the attackers and killed him. Since their village had been destroyed by the Philistines, Adinah and Elet had nowhere else to go, I suppose. My parents let them live with us. The reality was that even if they had, we had bonded, and while I may not have admitted it, I could not easily see them leave. Elet was like a younger sister to me, and she saw me as not just a brother, but her guardian. Adinah, well, I was not quite sure exactly what my feelings for her were, at least that is what I told myself then. I did not see her as a sister, but I was still unsure of what I felt. Her feelings for me had been made noticeably clear, at least to my parents. She had effectively proposed the idea of marriage to my parents a year before. I was not supposed to know, but my father had told me accidentally. I looked up at the sky and could still see the stars. The Ole donkey was dragging his 4 feet, it seemed. "Come on," I called. "Don't make me," I said without completing what exactly I would do. The donkey apparently understood, and we continued on our way as I thought of the past and wondered what the future would bring.